When I was a child in the early 90s, I would often play a variety of different games with a friend, though not many of them were thought-provoking or meaningful beyond being a means to pass the time. One day, we discovered Secret of Mana, a JRPG that allowed up to 3 people to play on screen at the same time, and we were hooked from the get-go. Even though these days the game's visual acuity is nothing compared to modern AAA titles, at that time, the simple pixel art and the story, that had a much broader scope than anything we'd seen before, ignited our imaginations. Recently, my partner agreed to play through the game with me, with the caveat that we play in Japanese, so I was excited to revisit the title that inspired me to think beyond the simple text and pictures of games as a child. With that in mind, let's look at the game through not only the lens of nostalgia, but also, where possible, let us note the differences between the Japanese and English versions of Secret of Mana. Known as Seiken Densetsu 2 in Japan, Secret of Mana is a Japanese role-playing game that originated on the Super Famicon and was ported west for the Super Nintendo, though also much later received a Nintendo Switch port in the collection of Mana. The game originally released in Japan in 1993 and made its way west by the end of that year. However, due to Square wanting to capitalize on the Christmas period sales at the end of 1993, translator Ted Woolsey claims to have been given only 30 days to localize the game's text for an English-speaking audience. Due to this, sometimes the story feels a little basic, which is something that could have been improved upon had he been given more time to polish his work. That's not to say that the translation doesn't have its charm though. I remember always smiling as a kid when the text prompt stated that the enemy got whacked whenever a character performed a critical hit, for example, or the encouraging "way to go" that would appear after you defeated a boss and danced, thrusting your arm in the air as though you're at a blue light disco. We begin the game as a nameable male protagonist who I'll call Randy for the purposes of this review. Randy is a naughty boy, disrespecting his elders to play with his friends on a slippery log perched near to the top of a waterfall. After some clumsy footwork, he finds himself a victim to gravity as he falls to the churning waters below. Cushioned only by the plumpness of his derriere, he survives, though now has no way to get back to his village. As he attempts to navigate his way through the wilds, he stumbles upon a rusted sword that calls out to him. Ignoring all the local legends that he probably slept through the lessons of, he removes the rusted blade from its stone casing, releasing a blinding spray of light. After the fireworks settle down, he makes his way back to the village with the trusty blade in hand, only to find that monsters have been released and one of them has decided to establish a new abode for Randy inside of its belly. Defeating the monster, Randy is soon banished from the village for bringing misfortune to it, for the blade he drew was the fabled Sword of Mana. He is left to make his way through the world with nothing but the clothes upon his back and the mysterious sword clutched tightly within his hopeless fist. Not too long after, Randy meets Prim, a girl who can't see eye to eye with her father, who is looking for her boyfriend, a knight of the Kingdom of Pandora. After some back and forth bickering about whose task has the most priority, the two eventually decide to head to Gaia's navel, where they hope to acquire an axe that will allow them to progress in the misty, maze-like forests surrounding the witch's castle. After clearing lint from Gaia's stomach, in the form of dispatching monsters, the two find themselves in the dwarven village where a famous blacksmith lives. Here, they are conned into a sob-story show and donate money to an amnesiac midget sprite who is desperately trying to get home. After another earthquake rocks the realm, revealing yet another monster that the two promptly dispatch, the midget, who is actually a forest sprite named Popoi, is forced to apologize, return the money that he took, and then joins the party as the final member. With all players on the board, the true adventure begins. As you journey across the land, you'll inevitably encounter numerous monsters that have become more vicious since the Sword of Mana was released from its stone. If you've played Square titles around Secret of Mana's original release, then you'd be familiar with the ATB system, which sees the player waiting for their turn before attacking, as the gorge grows beneath them. Secret of Mana does away with this, as well as the traditional random turn-based encounters, by making all enemies appear on the field screen. Attacking them is as simple as pressing a button, however for maximum efficiency you need to wait between button presses for a gorge to fill to 100% for optimal damage. In addition to this, depending on the weapon's level and a character's proficiency with it, holding down the attack button will cause the gorge to charge, and you can store this until you're ready to release it, at the cost of your movement speed. Across the game there are 8 weapons in total, and each one can be upgraded by finding weapon orbs, usually after beating bosses, and sometimes found in chests, and taking these to the trusty dwarven blacksmith Watts. Each weapon has a different utility, whether it be in its reach or in assisting to navigate the environment, such as the whip allowing you to jump over small gaps. Upgrading weapons also change their properties and appearances to make them more effective against certain enemies, or to impart status ailments upon the foe with each strike. A particular favourite of ours was when you could balloon enemies, holding them in place and making them look like they had just finished enjoying Guardia's millennial fare. People often criticise the game for having janky combat, though I feel that this comes down to a misunderstanding of its fundamentals. The main complaint often levelled at the game is that it has bad hit detection, when from experience this isn't exactly true. If you miss an enemy, it's because they are either flying or have a high evasion. Likewise, when you get higher in level you may find times when an enemy fails to hit you for the same reason, and you'll even receive an animation of your character dodging their attack. Most enemies that fly also cannot be hit unless they are on the ground, which can sometimes be achieved by first stunning them with magic. Additionally, some enemies cannot have attacks stacked against them, where others can. The key is to discover how to deal with each enemy type, which makes the adventure so much more bearable and less frustrating, instead of forcing you to curse at the game's programming every time you miss an attack. Do I agree with the way the game was programmed? No, it could have been handled better, however I also do not agree with calling the system janky or broken when it works as it was originally intended. A little into the narrative, our party will encounter their first elemental spirit, Undini, who bestows them with the ability to cast magic. In total there are 8 spirits that will give the party magic, and each spirit imparts up to 3 spells to each character, though only Prim and Popoi can cast spells, Prim support and Popoi attack. Magic operates in a similar way to weapons in terms of proficiency, with a higher level dealing more damage. The maximum level magic can be raised to is determined by the number of mana seeds that the party has synchronized with in each of the palaces, at a maximum of 8. One thing that I enjoyed was that the animations for each of the different spells changed as they became stronger. For example, Sylphid's Air Blast would have bigger discs of wind at a higher level. One complaint that I do see about the use of magic, and one that my partner had, was that to use it you need to pause combat, which completely pulls the other player out of the experience. In the instance of bosses, you can have Popoi spam magic to the point where the other 2 characters become complete deadweight. The game encourages this too, as some bosses are not affected by physical attacks to the same degree that magic damages them. I felt that the game could have been a little better balanced in this regard. Speaking of pausing the game's menu is accessed using the ring command system, where a ring of icons appear floating above a chosen character's head when the menu button is pressed. This pauses the game whilst you navigate the various menus such as changing equipment, casting magic, using an item, or setting the AI tactics for your useless characters that will still get stuck in environmental obstructions despite this. I didn't have too much of a problem with the menu system, but my partner felt that it was counterintuitive to the overall experience when every so often you had to pause the action in order to execute magic. However, there were times when this was useful in coordinating a timely escape, which didn't always end in our favour. Upgrading your equipment is the vital task of any adventurer, and for our cast there was no exception. You can purchase new headwear, chest armour and bracelets from the various stores around the world, though sadly when making a purchase you'll not know if the equipment you are buying is more effective than what you are wearing until after you've bought it. It is important to upgrade your equipment though, as we saw a huge difference in the amount of damage we were taking in the Pure Land. The griffin feet that stepped all over our carcasses became a breeze to blast through once we changed our equipment at the Neko store outside of the Tree Palace. In terms of items, there is an inventory limit, where you can only carry a maximum of 4 of each consumable item, so you really need to make sure that you are conserving your resources, especially when you know you're going to be in a dungeon for the long haul. During the course of our adventure together, one of the things that my partner enjoyed the most about the game was the drop-in drop-out feature that allowed him to pick up or drop out of the game whenever he liked. Whilst he did enjoy bashing the skulls of the enemies and seeing them suffer the wrath of Prim's ire, his most favourite thing to do was drop out of play during the sections of village exploration, as he felt that it wasn't necessary for him to do anything. Though when we were playing in the fields together, it was often entertaining to race to the nearest exit to force the other player to walk off the environment to the next screen as if no laws of physics bound their physical body. It's difficult to deny the charm of the game, from the animation the characters perform when they are preparing to leap over a gap to the excited jingle of treasure inside a box as it shook like a Christmas present before the contents are dumped onto the ground. And hey, even Santa makes an appearance. And let's not forget the most conventional method of travel, being shot out of a cannon. As a whole, the game oozes a level of charisma that is perhaps why the game is still so cherished by some to this day. But it's also difficult to imagine that this game isn't the entire vision of Hiromichi Tanaka and Koichi Ishii. In an interview with Swedish magazine Level in 2006, Tanaka-san mentions that the game was entirely different from what we received. This was because the game was originally developed for the SNES CD add-on, which eventually got scrapped, leaving Square to scramble to redevelop the game to work for the Super Famicom. According to Tanaka-san, about 40% of the game content, including minigames and a much darker tone, got cut, some of which was reused for Chrono Trigger. And did you know that the experience was originally planned to be single player only? Can you imagine? Playing the Japanese version of the game showed me that there weren't that many major changes other than some terminology being different between the Japanese and English counterparts. For example, Pamela in the Japanese version was renamed to Fanna, who I always mistakenly call Fanny, which wasn't, in my opinion, too egregious. Besides, who wants to think of Baywatch when playing the game? Some of the dialogue in Japanese is a little longer too, but the information given in these conversations is superfluous and just fluff that doesn't really add to the overall experience. Whilst Woolsey was only given 30 days to localize the script, I feel that he managed to capture the essence of the game in a way that can be related to by a Western audience. One thing that did surprise me though was the spell animation for Earthslide, called Earthquake in Japan, which is an exploding boulder in the English version, but a wriggling namazu in the Japanese version of the game. In traditional Japanese folklore, the namazu is a giant fish that resides within the earth, whose thrashing is said to be the cause of earthquakes. At the time of release, I feel like this depiction would have been lost on a Western audience, so the change to an exploding boulder makes much more sense. One of the bosses also received a change due to its appearance, but this was probably because of Nintendo of America's censorship laws at the time, rather than any other reason. The entire game has a colourful, storybook-like appearance, from the lush environments such as the four-season forest of the Upperlands to the winter tundra of the north, replete with glimmering crystal trees. Character and enemy animations are cute and well thought out, especially the enemies when they get whacked. The amount of detail put into the animations was something that I really appreciated. Spell effects are flashy, and the fact that they upgrade always gave me something to look forward to. I also appreciated that the different towers had an aesthetic to them, so it was easy to navigate them. Musically, the game is extremely memorable, with multiple tracks that I often find myself returning to, even to this day. One problem that I did have with the music when playing through the game though was that sometimes, due to certain sound effects playing at the same time as the music, it would cause some levels of the music track to distort, which was a feature of the Super Famicom that wasn't patched out in the collection of mana released for the Switch. Whilst it can be annoying at times, it didn't make our ears bleed, so it was bearable. My favourite track is Ceremony, which plays at most locations that Thanatos appears in. It's suitably creepy and sets the mood for those sections of the game, along with the encroaching mist, people acting like zombies, and all the undead themed enemies. Secret of Mana was one of the golden children of the Super Nintendo era of games, and due to the limited number of JRPGs that PAL regions received, it's not difficult to see why. Whilst these days it's difficult to ignore the way the game is programmed in places, which makes it less intuitive or easy to play, I feel like overall they aren't things that make the game unplayable. The warm cast who pokes fun at each other but ultimately end up caring for one another were a joy to journey with, regardless of whether you played the game in English or the native Japanese language. A basic story awaits those brave enough to attempt it, but in no way does this detract from the game's charm. If you have not played this game, then I would recommend it, especially if you're a fan of the Mana series, and especially if you have someone to play it with. By the way, to those of you that have played this game, which character do you usually like to take control of? Typically, I tend to control Popoi because of his use of magic. What about you? Let me know in the comments. This has been Venoir with a review of Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. If you've enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe for more great JRPG content. As always, thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and bye bye for now.